Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kuderna podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Brian Kuderna, and we got another great guest on deck today in Elaine Pofeldt. But before we dive into today's conversation, just want to quickly remind everyone if you could please like and subscribe wherever it is that you watch or listen to the show. That's a huge help as I continue to try and spread all things wisdom around wealth in its original meaning, a state of well-being. And we did just that today with Elaine Pofeldt. If you're not familiar with who she is, let me give you a quick bio. Elaine Pofeldt is the author of The $1,000,000 One-Person Business, published by Random House. This was really the launchpad for much of our conversation. I mean, who out there wouldn't love to be $1,000,000 one-person business? But it's becoming more and more popular in today's world. And we took a deep dive into some of the different techniques, tools, marketing platforms, how to use social media, AI, a lot of really cool stuff so that you can actually accomplish that. It's probably easier than you actually think. Elaine's also the author of Tiny Business, Big Money, and she's a ghostwriter for many popular business books focusing primarily on entrepreneurship. She's currently the executive editor of the Social Capital Insider at Dave Alexander Center for Social Capital. It's a really cool publication focused on companies that put people first. You may have seen Elaine previously in Fortune Magazine, Money, Inc., CNBC, Millie, Crane's New York Business, Forbes, and much more. She does a lot of podcasts, including one of my favorite shows, The Tim Ferriss Show. So you've probably seen some of her content and expertise out there already. As a senior editor at Fortune Small Business, Elaine worked there for 8 years. She was twice nominated for the National Magazine Award for her features and ran the magazine's annual business plan competition. Elaine graduated from Yale University and has a lot of really cool experience that we had a great time discussing today. I think there's a lot of takeaways here, whether you're running a business, you're an entrepreneur, an investor, or just trying to figure out how to be more efficient with your day-to-day routines. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Elaine Pofeldt.
Is going to require work and time and sweat and toil.
If money wasn't an issue, what would I be doing?
Don't worry about it. You'll figure it out.
Change is the only constant.
The Kuderna Podcast.
Elaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I think a really good starting point would be this book of yours. I love the title, and I know the content is even better. The $1,000,000 One-Person Business. So I guess, can you give us just a Cliff Notes for anyone who hasn't read it? How is that done?
Well, there are a lot of different routes to building the $1,000,000 one-person business. Actually, the most popular one is professional services, believe it or not. This, I looked, it came out of census data. The U.S. Census Bureau tracks a number of businesses that have no employees that are getting to different revenue levels. So it could be like 100,000, 250,000, and so on. And I noticed in the data that there was this small but growing group of businesses across industries like e-commerce, accounting, manufacturing, even because people can now outsource manufacturing, real estate rental and leasing, aka Airbnb, and some other ones where people without running payroll were getting to 1 million and more in revenue. And that's what the book is about. It's what are they doing? How are they getting there? How are they different from you and me? And there are a lot of ways that they're different. And that was the fun journey of the book, because it's heavy on studies of real people. I've done a lot of events with people live where you get to meet the people, and there definitely are differences.
Yep. And where did the idea come from? Because it kind of reminds me of a good friend of mine, Tom Corley, wrote Rich Habits. And he went out and interviewed a whole bunch of people of extremely high net worth, and then a whole bunch of people that were below the poverty line to kind of determine the habits of the two different sides. It kind of seems somewhat similar. How did you come up with the idea? And then what was like the metric for the data that you were sourcing? How did you find that?
Well, the data is done by the U.S. government every year. It's called the Non-Employer statistics, and you have to know how to slice and dice them a little bit to get to the data. But so I didn't really do any work on the data other than analyze it, but I followed it over the years, and the numbers have been increasing steadily. And really, what is different, it's not so much habits like waking up at 5 in the morning or things like that, although some of them do have those good habits for a living. It's more a way of looking at their business. And one thing I would say is they're very big picture. They have an eye towards business development, as opposed to just hunting down the next project and doing it. They're thinking a lot bigger about the R&D of their business, the intellectual property that they're building, and there's kind of a strategy. Usually they just start out doing something, right? They're just like us, where you do the first project or you sell the first thing, and that becomes the business. But they take time to really think about where they're going. But then there are some practical things like using technology. They tend to use it as much as possible to run the business more efficiently. A good example would be a lot of podcasters would use Calendly or Schedule Ones or those apps, but they use a lot of different ones that save time so that they can free up time for that strategic thinking and the relationship building and all the things that go into a business. They use, in addition to automation, which now is starting to include AI, they also outsource. And I think one of the things people think when they see the title, The $1 Million One Person Business, is that you're living in a vacuum. It's just you alone. But no business exists alone. There are always people in your supporting cast who are helping you, but they're usually contractors like virtual assistants or a social media consultant rather than formal employees.
Interesting. And like, as you were looking at this, I know you mentioned some things of real estate, Airbnb, professional services, and, maybe a standalone accountant or attorney. I imagine that there would be a lot of repetition there of people that have accomplished that in a number of different areas, where they are the accountant, they do own the Airbnb, they have a side hustle. Like, would you see that they had been that one person $1 million business more than one time in kind of different arenas?
That's a good question. I have seen some of them are portfolio entrepreneurs. So they have several different things that they do that add up to the million. That's what I'm seeing lately,
Okay.
where people diversify, but I don't know that they're separately non-employer businesses in all of the areas where they get to
Okay.
a million. So I definitely think it's possible, but I think focus has been important to a lot of them. So they tend to realize they are the business to some extent. They're not. Back years ago, people used to, if you called their phone number, say they were calling you, it would be like, to reach Brian, press 1, to reach our accounting department, press 2, to reach so-and-so, press 3, and it was all going to you. They try to look bigger than they really are. These businesses realize people want authenticity. They want the real person. They want that person's personality and soul in the business. So they're very focused, I think, on personal branding in a way that maybe wasn't as common 15 or 20 years ago. The conventional wisdom was like, you don't want to be associated with your brand too closely because you can't sell the business. But now it's like, no, the personality drives things somewhat.
Got it. So that brand is almost bigger than the business in a way. And the reason I was asking that is, like, when you study entrepreneurs or business leaders, it seems like lots of times it's just kind of like a mentality that the individual, the man or the woman has, that they can repeat. You think of like an Elon Musk that can go from PayPal to Tesla to Twitter or X, or just these totally different ideas, but it's like they have the makeup that they can kind of cross boundaries. I was curious if you kind of see that on a smaller scale, or if it was more someone that has a passion that says it's this thing, whatever that service or that product is, where then they make their million, or if it was more they have the makeup of the individual where the thing doesn't matter that much because whatever it was that they pursue, they would be successful at.
I see what you're saying. It's kind of like venture capitalists always bet on the jockey, not the horse.
Exactly. Yeah.
they are serial entrepreneurs sometimes. I'll give you an example. Anthony Coombs, he started Splendies, which is one of those box companies, kind of like Birchbox, but it sells plus size women's lingerie. And their main customers are in areas that are a little more remote in the country. So someone would have to drive hours to get to the store. And he did a number of different businesses before he started that one. He did like online auto sales before that was popular. He had a location dependent social media app where you could see who was in your vicinity. This is before all the social media apps could do things like this. He sold mosaic tiles online, but none of them were at $1 million. It seemed like they were almost like his grad school in starting a business. And then he took what he learned, and then he created Splendies, which was it still is a multi-million-dollar one-person business. I see that. I see people like Jason Allen Scott, who he's a paid speaker. He has an app for renting vacant meeting space. He has a podcasting school, and he has a couple of other businesses, and he's done them simultaneously. He even has one that does it rents cryotherapy machines, and they add up to over $1 million, and he runs them simultaneously. But I have not seen what you're saying, the person who goes from $1 million one person business to the next one. So I'm throwing down the gauntlet on this show, right?
Sure, yeah.
Challenge somebody who's done it once. If you could do it once, who sometimes I think it happens in e-commerce. I think Emil and Ben Arneberg, I don't know this for sure, but my guess, they had a business selling housewares on Amazon that was over $1 million.
Okay.
They created an incubator for other e-commerce businesses, and they have created Pet Honesty, which sells healthy pet treats. And that business, I think, is over $1 million, but I can't swear to it. That would have to be fact checked. But they use their successful e-commerce formula. I think that industry lends itself to it because once you know how it works, you
can just keep leveraging that again and again. Yeah. And how many people, if you don't mind my asking, like how many people did you interview to come up with the book? And was it a combination of like all of the data you referenced from the census? And then you just finding people? Like that would be my follow-up question, is how did you find these people? Like what was kind of the tie in there between the data and then ultimately the subjects that you were interviewing and figuring out like the way that they did it?
Well, I found the data. I was looking for ideas to write about. I write 5 blogs a month for Forbes, and I kind of ran out of ideas, found the data online, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. Let me poke around. I'm a little bit of a data geek.
Okay.
So I wrote the first post ever about it. It was about 2012 or 2013 about the data, and it went viral, and people started writing to me and saying, that was a real cliffhanger. Can you tell us more? So I didn't have any way of finding the people because the Census Bureau won't tell you who filled out those surveys. So I wrote to the readers of Forbes and I said, are you one of these businesses? I'd love to know more. And they started writing to me, but it was really a trickle. In 1 year, I got 5. And so I wrote about some of the people in the book, like Alan Walton, who has an online spy camera shop called Spy Guy. Rachel Charlupsky, she has a babysitting company that she runs from a smartphone with outposts all over the country. Those two have, he started hiring employees. She has consistently been a one-person business. There was Dan Mezaritsky, who he's a fitness trainer. He was licensing his methodology to other fitness trainers. And a lot of the revenue came not just from the training, but also from the licensing. And he has a CRM that he developed and so on. So I wrote about them. And I found that the case studies really brought it to life. What was different about these businesses in the census statistics, which are pretty dry, why are they at $1 million? And it was generally they're leveraging tools that can extend what one person can reasonably do in a week. They're not working 95 hours a week. It's more that they're being efficient and then they're amplifying. So it's efficiency plus amplification. They get very good at using online advertising or social media. Now there are so many new tools since I wrote the first book, TikTok, for instance. but there's a sustainability to it also. I didn't really write about one hit wonders who had a viral video and that was the whole business, because it doesn't tell us that much except that they got lucky. I really looked for people that did it sustainably. And
Yeah.
that's why there isn't that much churn in the businesses, because for a lot of them, it is a passion. To your point earlier, they
Yeah.
love what they do. And like Megan Telpner runs an online nutrition school. She was like an 11-year overnight success story in getting to 1 million. And the business has changed form over the years, where she added new offerings like a meditation course, for instance. But basically, she's a nutritionist who runs businesses tied into her knowledge, and she refreshes it from time to time.
Sure. So it seems kind of like a not a surprise in the sense that a lot of these are all different ideas, but that are leveraging tech and social media and e-commerce to really scale, which would totally make sense. With that in mind, like, did you notice that any particular commonalities, like particularly age, comes to mind? Because I think a lot of young professionals, even those coming out of college, they're like on the cutting edge of what's going on TikTok, how to use TikTok, or what the latest app is, and things like that, where more seasoned professionals that might have the service or the product, I can tell even from my world in financial services and wealth management, I am inundated, I mean, every week with new apps that can help do this, new CRM software that will do that, new automation, there's so much that it's like overwhelming, and it's hard to even kind of cut through the fat to find out, okay, which of these tools do I really want to utilize other than just going off of kind of word of mouth. So to that point, I mean, did you see that these kind of these solopreneurs, like, did they fit a usual mold, be it age or personality or something like that?
No, and that is what's so interesting. I have everybody's ages in the books for that very reason.
Huh.
And you know a little bit about their demographics, where they live, what they've done in their careers. And there really isn't one demographic that excels in this. And I think it's because, as you point out, younger people who grew up with tech are digital natives. And like, if I want to know something about Discord, I ask my 14-year-old son. He's
Yeah.
my expert on that. But generally speaking, we all have different strengths and weaknesses. So somebody who is older probably has a pretty well-developed professional network. So although they may not know Discord, they can just send an email to somebody and make something happen because they have 30 years of trust built up. So Steve Ferreira, for instance, he does ocean audit, where he was in a boring business, basically auditing the bills that an ocean freighter would send to J.C. Penney or someone like that with 1,000 shirts on it. And he finds errors, and then he goes to J.C. Penney or whatever the client is and says, I discovered a $250,000 error. I will tell you what it is, and I get to keep 50% as my commission. He makes like $1.8 million a year in revenue as a solopreneur. So in his case, he has many years of experience. He has the gravitas to approach the CEOs or CFOs, and the emotional intelligence on how to present this in a way that the CFO doesn't feel like he has, or she has, egg on their face, because there was this error and nobody caught it. He's adding to their bottom line. So because he's a veteran, he understands how they think, and that's allowed him to succeed. So I would say for all of them, what they have in common is they figured out what their unique strengths are. If they're an introvert, maybe they're marketing online. If they're an extrovert, they're at trade shows, and they lean into that. And I think that's what's so different about having your own business versus being in corporate. You're supposed to be a certain way in corporate. There's a culture that you have to fit into. In these one-person businesses, you can just identify your own strengths and lean into them, and then you can excel on your own terms. And there's no one saying you're not enough. You're not the way you're supposed to be. If it works for you, your customers, your suppliers, etc., then it works. And that's an edge that they have.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, you are the culture at that point, so you can kind of be whatever that might be. So I just want to sidestep a little bit, like, as we were talking about some of these tools that everybody's leveraging And I know, like, even if I look at my career over the past 15 years, nothing novel, but if you look at some of the things I've really used, like LinkedIn, some Facebook advertising, things like that, YouTube, that have really generated a buzz or kind of attracted more business. You mentioned Calendly earlier. I know a lot of other podcasters use that. That's something, for instance, I've been averse to both with podcasting and my business, because I feel like sometimes I'll get people booking meetings where I don't want those people in those time slots. And so that's something I haven't adopted, because if I put like, oh, I want Monday and Wednesday, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., you got your A clients, your B clients, your C clients, or you have that podcast guest you've been dying for, and then one that maybe you haven't. It's kind of like you lose a little control of your schedule. What are some ones maybe that you've seen? I know it's always changing, and they're different from field to field, but have you seen any that people are like, you've got to have this, or you've got to use this tool?
Oh, definitely. And I agree with you. I've backed away from using my scheduling app for those same reasons, but I think learning the functions better for me might help, because it does save me a lot of time. Sometimes if I'm doing a lot of journalism work, it could save me a whole day's worth of time fiddling around with my schedule. But I think the master users I use Schedule once. There's ways to block out different types of time in the schedules, which I have never had the time to master, but I want to, because I think it's a valuable tool. But sometimes it's an important point that with some of these technologies, you can only learn so many, and there are so many new ones coming out.
Exactly.
And I think they're very selective. So some of them have told me they evolved their technology suite a lot to simplify, eliminate some. They're constantly cleaning house with these things. The ones that I'm finding are very powerful that I learned about usually from these entrepreneurs. Fathom, which is an attachment to Zoom, where it's a meeting, it's a note taker, an AI note taker, but it would create a video like our conversation. It has a summary and action steps, and then it has a whole transcript, and you just click a button if you want to send it to the attendees in the meeting. And so for me, I do a ghostwriting practice. I can do that with every client now, so they know what their homework is. They know every single thing we discuss. They can go back to the video if the notes are not as good as they could be, because that is a problem with AI. And it has sped up the process of writing a book, which normally takes about a year to about 4 or 5 months, because managing the notes was such a big issue. It seems like a small thing, but it's very tedious cleaning them up. And what I do, if I use Microsoft Note Taker, it's very sloppy. So I'll take those notes and feed them into ChatGPT and use the prompt, please clean these up for typos and errant spacing without changing the words. And you say, please extract the key points, so that if you're doing multiple calls with a client, for instance, you know what was talked about and you don't have to sift through reams of paper. So I think having some type of an AI note taker is really important. There's confidentiality issues, so it's important to pick the right ones. Sometimes the paid ones are better. I think for a lot of people, tools that can take transcripts of video now are really important. I would say finding one like that.
Which is exactly what I do with this. Like, I was introduced when I was doing my podcast, I guess maybe 2 years ago. So take it like 2023 and prior. A lot of the visual side was on Zoom, which was great. But then I got introduced to Riverside, which is a very, and that's what we're using right now. It's a very easy kind of plug and play, where a lot of like what you said, where afterwards, we hit record, we end the recording, and you get an entire transcript. You can click, magic clips, where it uses the AI and it'll suck out, 5 or 6 kind of clips of a 30 or 60-second variety that are like highlights of the show, and edit them. And it is crazy, like how much AI can just take away all this production needs that we used to need just to kind of make a decent show. So there's so many different things. It's really cool. And I know you mentioned ChatGPT. Do you use any other AI that you really like right now?
I love TurboScribe. If any of you go to conferences, it's really helpful in terms of taking notes. Like you could upload the MP3 of a whole 2-day conference and within 15 or 20 minutes get a transcript of everything that was said. So if you want to remember what was said, it's something that you invested your time and money in going to, that's really valuable for your business. I think having a tool like that is really, really helpful. And sometimes after events, if you didn't record, usually you can't record on the floor of an event, but there's something that you can purchase afterward that will have the recording. That this can take it a step further where you have it in writing.
Yeah.
This is not a tool that is AI at all. But I use Libby, which is an app from the library where you can check out books online. And I find in the type of work we do, reading a lot is really helpful, but you can't have zillions of books in your house. After a certain point, I have a certain maximum number of bookshelves. So it's great for checking out books that you want to just check out quickly, like maybe someone made a reference to it. You just need a library card if your library has it. So I've been using Libby a lot. And I know you could do audiobooks too, which a lot of entrepreneurial types like to fit in on their drive or their walk. And I haven't done that one yet, but I'm going to. Those are probably my main ones. I think the game changer was really Fathom. I learned about that one actually from a podcaster. And ever since I tried it, I've used it with every client and they always adopt it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's something I'll definitely look into because I've still used Zoom exclusively for business. So that would be good. And that's kind of what Riverside did. Almost was like a combination of Zoom and what you're describing Fathom as. At least that's how I've utilized it. But kind of like a side note, one of my concerns with the AI is like, let's say you go to that conference, you record 2 days of great speakers and content and so forth. And then you throw it in Chat GPT so that it can give you a quick summary or what your cliff notes are. One thing I kind of want more info on is like when you paste that content, where does that go in the sense of it possibly being recorded or reused through that? And the reason I bring that up is I'm writing a book right now and signed a contract with a publisher. And as my attorney reviewed it, he wanted in there a clause that they could not sell bulk portions of the content to AI. And I was like, I don't even know what this means. And he said a lot of publishers now are selling content to AI companies such as ChatGPT, so that now when someone says, oh, I want to know about whatever mutual fund, it might pull this source of all this data that was your content in your book. And that was something unbeknownst to me, but I guess this is happening a lot. And that's ultimately where the AI is getting, it's got to get more and more info every day. I mean, do you happen to have any insight on that? If you throw a great novel idea to summarize in Chat GPT, does it own it and now recycle that to 1,000 other people that ask that question?
That's a complex question. There's probably some legal aspects to it. I formed a little group of journalists because we're all learning how to maximize our use of AI, not to write things, but for things like this, these sort of back office functions. And this has been a question that we discussed on our last call, was how to use it in a way that isn't violating confidentiality. And they had found some ways to sort of scrub things out of it once you've used the tool, like to erase it. But a lot of these things depend on trust.
Yes,
definitely. But it's similar, I think, to when you give information to a financial services company, they're always getting hacked, right? And then you get this from Experian that you get 1 free year of credit monitoring.
Yeah.
They're all getting hacked constantly. So I think if it's that sensitive, I wouldn't put it into AI.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. No, nothing to that's going to expose yourself. I would agree.
Yeah. Because we just don't know, right?
Yeah.
We really don't know. We're trusting, we're hoping for the best, but there are rogue employees at places. There are hackers. There are spies online, who are like, they put a little thing on your computer and they're tracking everything. And you don't want to be super paranoid, but I would say for anything extremely sensitive, sometimes you can take some of the material, like you not put names in there, phone numbers, or things that would obviously be very sensitive. But I still think it has its value for just routine stuff.
Definitely.
super confidential.
Yeah. It's funny though, as we discuss this, because I feel like the pendulum just naturally swings. Like you look at, we had for so long, oh, I want to listen to a radio show or something for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, just kind of a quick segment, or interviews where you're listening to someone on the nightly news where they get all of 60 seconds to explain their entire stance. And then we kind of swung over to like the Joe Rogan style of, all right, we'll do a 3.5 hour conversation, super in depth of whatever the topic is. And then we have AI, giving us, well, what's the 10-minute version of that? So it's kind of like we move back and forth. And I think that's the thing too with AI is, and going back to the tools that solopreneurs could use, is you do lose some of the nuance. And I've noticed this like in writing, like if I go to ChatGPT and I say, hey, I want some information on in 1951 post World War II climate, what was whatever, you'll get a quick synopsis. But then if you say, I want the same question sourced, so that you can actually have real sources, you could get a different answer. It's like, all right, was the first one not completely clear? Or like, so I love these tools, but I think people got to be a little bit, you want to race and go faster, but also you want to kind of like slow down and make sure you're not skipping a beat.
I agree. Well, my son showed me how to use ChatGPT initially, and I said, tell it to write an article on $1 million one-person businesses. And what I saw was, well, it was stealing a lot of my material. Second of all, it was garbling it, and a lot of it was inaccurate. So if you ask it to write about something you yourself have written about, where you are the original source, and you'll see where the gaps are. It's a pretty good summarizer. One exercise I would recommend is for anyone doing this program, because I think AI marketing is going to be important. Ask it this question. Let's say you're doing it. What is Brian Kuderna known for? What differentiates Brian Kuderna? And see what it spits out. And I found that for me, it was fairly high level and accurate, in terms of the main things that I've done. And I think because I'm well published and I write a lot and I'm all over social media, but it can also help you identify opportunities where maybe you haven't differentiated yourself publicly on something that you're already doing because you're not really writing about it or talking about it. And if you want to raise your profile, increasingly, we're going to use this as a search engine.
That's great.
Well,
It's a great branding idea, for branding and marketing.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, and I think we're all curious how we're perceived. And because it's not a synthesizer, it's a summarizer of what's out there, we can influence it. We don't know the algorithm, but I would imagine putting certain information prominently on your website, on your LinkedIn, if you do any writing in your field, always putting certain things out there that you want to be in it, they'll eventually make their way into the mix. I used it for shopping too. The other day, my son wanted a pair of bicycle sneakers. And I said, what are the best places to purchase this brand of sneakers in this size for the best prices? And it gave me 5 good answers. And so I thought, okay, this might be the new Google, right? Where I didn't go to Google because I knew that would be bogged down with a lot of ads and things like that. So for people who are looking at where is the puck going, and I know that a lot of the $1 million one-person businesses are thinking this way, AI marketing is going to be important. And I think there's going to be a lot of experimenting right now because there really aren't too many experts on whatever the algorithm is for ChatGPT to appear in the searches. You can't buy ads in it. So you can't.
I feel like that's a matter of time. Like when you look at the revenue stream to Google to be able to get your, I want my shoe company or whatever near the top of that list or on the first page. Like you just said, I think more and more people will go to a ChatGPT to say, what are the best running sneaker? And I can't imagine that they're going to be turning away Nike, Adidas, and Brooks and their billions of dollars to get a favorable mention or something, in that respect. So.
I wonder. Yeah, I really don't know where it's going to go because it's so new. I mean, it's not really that new AI, but these mass products that we can all use pretty easily. Sure. It might be that they do white label stuff internally for companies. You
Mhm.
create, their own private AI. I know some companies have been doing that. I would imagine like enterprise stuff or very sophisticated stuff, because I don't know how you would keyword stuff or use SEO in that, because it's
Yeah,
kind of a black box right now. We don't
it
know
is.
how it
I
works.
feel like it's a black box to all the outside, but that there's someone, the handful of people, the Sam Altmans on the inside that, and then they can possibly sell some of that. But switching gears a little bit, kind of coming back to the book, I'm just curious. A lot of people, they want to be exactly what you described. They want to be a solopreneur. They think the idea of, man, I can make $1 million and I am the business. I control my schedule. I can be the culture that I want to be, all those things we described. So they say, I got the entrepreneurial spirit. I want to do it all, but I don't have the idea. I've seen this time and time again where people, they want to go do it, but they don't know what to do. I don't know if you found this like in all of your research or talking with people, like where do they generate the ideas of what their business or their thing is going to be? Or were they already doing it and they just found like, hey, here's a better way to do it. And then they pursued that path. What was your take on that?
In my experience, they didn't go hunting for an idea. It kind of hit them on the head like an acorn. And I'll give you an
Okay.
example. I just did a program with the New York Public Library where Matt Tesvich was a panelist, and he's the inventor of skunk skin. And he's young, he's 24, and he was a high school baseball player, and he was out in the wetness and his sneakers would get stinky, and he wanted a solution to the stinky socks and everything. So he noticed that his friend in college at University of Georgia had an antimicrobial towel, and he started getting curious about the fabric and could that be made into socks. So here's where they're different from the average person. He called something like 100 fabric factories in North Carolina and finally found one that could make this into socks and experimented with that. He tested it out on his friends who were athletes, and then he started selling it. He got into Amazon Prime has a show that's similar to
Shark Tank.
Shark Tank. I was going to
Yeah.
say Shark Skin for something, but Shark Tank. So he found out his biggest customers were either people that did manual labor who were like in their boots and they had to go into people's houses, or the mothers of teenage athletes who were doing the laundry, and were looking for a solution. And so he took them to lunch and he asked them about their needs and what they liked about the product, what they would improve. And it was a small investment in making a better product. And he kept iterating it. And now he's on track for 1 million. He's not quite there yet, but
Wow.
he did really great with it. And in part, he's a master of what you were talking about, things like TikTok videos. But it was really, he saw a need in the marketplace and he addressed it. But he was willing to do all that extra legwork to bring it to reality. I think there's a big market of people that would like to know that they could get to $1 million overnight, right? Get rich quick. It's the perennial sell, but that's not really the truth. The truth is that there's a lot of runway you have to build before you do this successfully. So if you're sitting in your office, you don't like your boss, you don't like what you're doing, you want to start a business, you have the spark. Well, there's a lot you can do to set yourself up so that you can actually be ready when the idea comes. Like, are you saving money? This is where wealth managers can be really helpful, right? Do you have the right financial foundation? Are you living below your means so that you have a little extra money to invest in it? Because one thing people don't always get, when you work for a company, they do all the investing in your education, in business development, all this stuff. In your own business, it's just you. So you have to be prepared to invest in yourself. And you don't want to invest in just any idea. You want to take steps to vet it along the way. And if you start to see the potential for some sort of return on your investment, then you'll keep going further. They always say to me that they're not risk tolerant. They say they're risk averse. So they do many small experiments before they get to the final product. So that's an example of what you can do. Then, as soon as you have some sort of a prototype, you go out to the market and you get reactions. part of it is putting your ego aside, because we all feel so vulnerable when we put something out there and it doesn't work. It's not what we thought. People don't love it as much as we did, but they separate themselves from those feelings and they say, what can I learn? And they turn it into a graduate course. And the ones who succeed just keep on iterating and trying things until they get it right, or they move on to something different.
Yeah, and I guess that goes back to kind of just the core of the entrepreneurial spirit of just persistence and not giving up and kind of all those classic measures. So, I mean, there's so much that we could talk about here, but I guess one of the things I'd want to know is what are some of the biggest stumbling blocks? Because I think when you have someone, I guess the classic story lots of times is, I'm getting tired of my 9 to 5, punching the clock, getting lost in this work that I'm doing kind of for the man, for the company. And I got this great idea. Now I want to start to kind of branch out on my own or jump ship. And there's so many things for the entrepreneur to do. I think first and foremost is always like marketing and PR, and just no matter what the idea is, getting it out to the universe. And you hear, lean into TikTok, into whatever the new trend is, or influencers and all this stuff out there. So much of which costs money to advertise or to get the eyeballs and the likes and the clicks and all this stuff. What do you think are like the biggest hurdles for that person that they're right at the ground and they're saying, I really like this and I'm willing to put in the work. Where do I go? What are those first steps and where do you see people usually get tripped up?
Well, one is just simply taking action. A lot of people get stuck in the idea phase. I used to run a business plan competition at Fortune Small Business Magazine for 5 years, and we had judges. Ann Winblad was one, Kay Coppola, with judges who had seen it all in terms of businesses. And they would invariably choose winners who did one thing, which was they got the product out into the marketplace and sold. Because at some point, and the product development cycle or service development cycle is different for every industry, if you're not selling something, it isn't a business. Mm-hmm. For an e-commerce business, maybe you'll be selling within the first 3 or 4 months. For a biotech, it might take 12 years to get through FDA approval. So it's the same for all of them. But if you're not getting it out there and selling it, or hiring someone with the sales skills to sell it, you won't have a business. So that's another thing to think about is, are you willing to sell? Because usually in the beginning of a business, you have to be your own salesperson. And when I do the library events, people hate selling. You'll see in the spreadsheets of submitted questions, I hate the ick factor of selling. The word ick would come up so much. People feel like it's sleazy. And you have to find a way to make it service oriented, I think, with the selling, so that you will actually do it. You don't have to sell like a used car salesman. Think about what you're offering, what it offers to people, get feedback, make it as good as it can be. And then you can confidently just have a calm conversation with people and be a consultative seller. When they tell you they have a problem, you can explain to them what you can offer, what you would recommend, maybe within certain ranges or tiers of budgets, because not everybody has the same budget. And then it will sell itself for the most part if you have the right product market fit. There are issues like timing. Like I mentioned, Anthony Coombs, he was selling cars online when nobody was buying them online. It was too soon for the market. So it was a good idea, but it was before its time. So just because it fails, it doesn't mean something was wrong with you or your idea. It might mean you have to wait another 2 years. But if you say invested in an idea that isn't working, then you might be losing other opportunities. So that's part of the mindset too, is like, is this the best investment of my time and money, or could I move on to something else? Depends on passion for the idea.
Sure. Yeah. Timing is everything. And so just to maybe kind of wrap things up here, because I know there's so many different directions that we could go. I'd like to know a little bit more about you, Elaine. I know that we've been talking entrepreneurship. This is kind of like your subject matter expert in this domain. But your path is pretty cool. I know that you went to Yale and you're a ghostwriter. I don't know if that's what you define as kind of like your primary job or occupation, but what is it? And can you just tell our listeners and viewers, like, what exactly a ghostwriter is, where there's that value still today, that so many people leverage that. Can you give us kind of some insights on kind of what your journey has been?
Sure. Well, I started out, I have always been a journalist and I still am, but the world has changed since I started my career. So in the beginning of my career, my most recent staff job was as a senior editor at Fortune Small Business Magazine,
Mm,
at the Fortune Group at Time Inc. And when I had my four children, I went freelance, and that was like 2007. I had twins in 2003 who are now 21. And I worked for 4 years at Time Inc. after having them, but I had a very flexible work from home arrangement. It was great. And then I had my third child, decided I wanted more control over my time. So I've been self employed for all these years.
and always writing on business, like throughout that time.
I started narrowing down to that because I found that I was interested in it and there was the most demand. I mean, I could write about other topics like green living or parenting or other things that I'm somewhat knowledgeable about, but I realized being a specialist was better than being
Hmm.
all things to all people. So I have written a lot of other things too. But I doubled down on that. And so for, I don't know, maybe the first 7 or 8 years of my career, I mostly just did journalism. And it was a time when a lot of the publications were still very strong. So I was writing for like Inc. magazine, Money, it pretty much all the major business publications. But then
Okay.
over time, that whole industry changed and it's almost like writing poetry now. You know, what I would get paid $5,000 for a few years ago, I would get paid $50 for now. So this is being an entrepreneur. Right now, I have three children in college at the same time. So I thought I'm basically a business writer and I can be very helpful to people with my knowledge and my skills. So how do I keep repurposing myself so that I stay relevant? And
Mm,
what I found was, especially after I wrote my own two books, people were coming to me asking for help with their books. And so I started doing private editing. Some people need an actual ghostwriter where I'm writing the whole thing for
mm,
them. I interview them and then we collaboratively turn it into a book. Usually there's like an outline process, sometimes a book proposal if we're pitching the the commercial media, and then there's the actual book.
okay.
Um, for custom books, they still need an outline, so you have a roadmap, and then you do the actual book, and maybe there's some advisory there with like helping them find a publisher.
Yeah.
And I enjoy it because I can teach people how to write. There are a lot of people that are good at marketing or ancillary fields that just need to understand book structure or how the outline process flows into a successful book or using anecdotes, very inside baseball things. So
Okay.
help them unlock their writer. And I always hope that once I've worked with somebody on one book, that they become more self-sufficient on the next one. And I'm more of like a consultative editor on the next one, because then they have the gift of writing, that they can write whatever they want. I mean, usually people can write articles without that kind of training, but writing a book is a big endeavor. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
it
Yeah.
helps have
The
the
roller coaster.
yeah, yeah. So I help a lot of friends too, with advice about how to make the process easier, because
Mm,
with the right process, it doesn't have to be so overwhelming.
yeah.
The hard part is the idea. Not everybody has the type of ideas that will sustain a whole book. So part of it is really differentiating your ideas, understanding how you move the conversation forward on that topic. So I do a lot of work with people about that because they don't always know what's so different about what they're saying. This is one reason I specialize is I work pretty much in the space of entrepreneurship. So I know what's been said for the
Yeah.
most part. I know what's original, what isn't. If I was doing cookbooks, I might think a recipe was brand new. And meanwhile, a million people have
It's
done
not.
variations on the theme. So that's why I don't do that. I really stick to my knitting on this, but I try to go really deep with people and make sure that their potential as a thought leader comes out in the book. And the books are all different. I mean, some of them are more narrative style chapters. Some of them are like little vignettes, of wisdom.
Yeah.
And part of the work is figuring out what format really suits the person's personality and voice. So there's a lot that goes into it. And what I like about it is a book is very lasting, right? Articles can
Mm,
get taken down and then it just lives in a file on your computer. A book is a tangible thing. And
sure.
it's a magnet for like-minded people. I have met so many interesting friends and contacts through my books. I mean, including some of my current best friends now that I met in life, that
That's awesome.
I met at my book events, and so they bring a lot of other things because they're more substantial. And like I'm out here today, you're out there talking about it, and
Yeah.
people hear you, they feel you're either relatable or you're not relatable, and they'll reach out. It's a beautiful thing, and I didn't expect that. Also, it leads to speaking engagement, so I now
Of
do
course.
speaking and I do moderating. I do, in addition to the panels at the library where I moderate panels of the people in my own books, I do private moderating. I'll do keynotes and things like that. And it all brings you into connection with people that will benefit from the ideas. So it's
Definitely.
really, just making sure you're adding value and that it's also fun and entertaining,
Of
or at
course.
least grab someone on an emotional level.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of feeds off of itself. Do you have, if you're able to share, do you have a favorite person or subject that you were the ghostwriter on?
Well, I can't really share it in most cases that I collaborate with people.
Okay.
The one that I can share, because he tells everybody I'm the longtime writing collaborator, Vern Harnish, who wrote Scaling Up. He was the founder of EO, but he does a lot of his own
Okay.
writing, more like a private editor for
Got
him.
it. Do you have just to kind of like put a bow on this idea? Do you have like what's next? Do you have a passion or a target where like all this stuff that we've discussed today, you're looking at and saying this is maybe the person, like almost a personal hero that I would love to ghostwrite their story, or is there a project that is up next for you that you're like, man, if I could get these introductions or find my way in there, what's the next big thing for Elaine?
Well, I'm working on my own next book, and I'm currently ghostwriting several books. So I feel like I'm not really hunting. I mean, if someone, I'm always looking for highly original thinkers who are
Okay.
really changing their industry. And you mentioned I'm involved with the Dave Alexander Center for Social Capital. It's a company that writes about companies that put people first and organizations that put people first. So, meaning their employees, their community, their customers, as opposed to sort of extractive capitalism that's
Mhm.
only about profit for the next quarter. And their companies like Delta Airlines, which has prioritized the financial wellness of its team. They're not all crunchy companies, although John Mackey has been involved, Marshall Goldsmith. We have a lot of companies and people that are known, for different ways of bringing consciousness to capitalism, but they're
Mhm.
not all the same ways. They all have their unique spin. So, like for instance, our
Interesting.
most popular story was on family-friendly workplaces, but how they define family, how they act on that is very varied. It's not political. We're politically neutral, and so I feel like part of my mission, I'm all about capitalism, but I'm about using it to help people, and not just that, to help the average person to prosper. And I
Mhm.
currently feel that the way things are taking shape, and this is partly because of tech, it's kind of death by a thousand cuts right now for the average person. There's so many fees and systems we have to be part of that, high interest rates, private equity buying up all the housing, buying small businesses, that it's getting harder for the average person to thrive. And so I feel like part of my mission is helping people find new revenue streams that are
Mhm.
supportive of having involvement with your family, involvement with your community, that don't take you away from the things that really matter in life, that are driven by good, not about taking money that hurts other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so I'm not like technically a conscious capitalist or any definition, but I really do care about people. And I feel like I want to bring that forth in the work that I do going forward.
that's great. No, no, I love that whole concept of kind of using capitalism for greater good and things of that nature. So last question I have for you, Elaine, that I have to throw in because it's my own question, writer to writer. I know that authors out there are kind of like an interesting breed. And one of the things I always like learning about is like the habit of writing. because I've heard so many different ideas from great writers out there. And for me, I feel like I can't mix my writing with my workday. It just, my head can't be in the two places. And sometimes, like when I've written books, the best writing where I'm just cranking out pages, it'll be at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, just sitting in my recliner. Do you have any kind of habit to that, or do you approach it and schedule it like a normal workday? I'm writing today from 9 to 5, or when you get immersed in your book or ghostwriting, do you have kind of those weird tics as well?
I generally will write in blocks of time. I find my first thing in the morning energy is best. So I would encourage anybody out there who's a writer, find out whatever time is best for you, where you're most productive. If it's 2 or 3 in the morning, 2 or 3 in the afternoon, whenever it is, the weekend, and use that time, use your energy in your own favor. I don't think sitting down and writing for 8 hours straight is that productive for me personally. There are people that do that, but I'm also a mother of 4 and I have other clients. So I have to multitask throughout the day.
Yeah.
So I would find that the uninterrupted time is usually on the weekends, like a Saturday morning. If I got up, I know this doesn't sound fun, but like 5 in the morning till 10, nobody's up yet.
Yeah.
It was like before all the sports would start up. And
Sure.
I could get in a decent amount of time, but this is where outlining really helps. And when I work with writers and teach them how to structure a book, generally we'll create a cycle where one writing session is about the opener, one is about the next part where you're setting up the chapter, what it's all about. In a news article, it's called the nut graph. It's just the summary almost of what you're setting up. And then maybe there's 3 major points. This is for a traditional narrative.
Okay.
So you do that one on the next one. That's a thinking exercise more than anything. What is going to go in this chapter? And then maybe there are 3 main sections. On the next session, you write the first section and then you stop and don't work on it anymore. Next session, you do the following one, and so on. Maybe it has 4 main bullets or sections. And you could get a chapter done in about a month that way, and it'll be pretty good. And if you get it to 80% of the way there, then I kind of sit on a rock at certain places. Like we'll go to 4 chapters or 5 and then look at it as a whole and then go back and re-edit a little bit to make sure it all flows. We like where things are going. This is whether it's someone else's book or my own.
Okay.
And you move forward again from the outline. And at that point, you might have to change the outline a little bit. But the reason for the outline is it's your GPS. If you just get in the car and say, I'm going to find my way there, I have no sense of direction. I'm not going to.
I don't know how people do that.
I'll be in
I know there are authors that do. And it's kind of like those artists that like, they don't even look at a thing that they're sketching. They just start sketching or painting just off of what's in their head. It's there's so many different ways to approach it.
But I think they've done the work in their head for years. Usually those people who work that way, it's kind of like an entrepreneur who says they have no business plan, but they know what they're doing. They've been thinking about it for a long time. They just never put it on a page, but it's in their head somewhere, because people have different ways of thinking too. When you think about it, like with neurodiversity, Paul Orfalia of Kinko's, he had dyslexia, right? So he kept a lot of things in his head. He didn't really use the pen and paper that much, but it doesn't mean he didn't know what he was doing with the, so I always, when you look at these people, it's kind of like the 1 year overnight success with the business, right? Like it's intimidating, but then when you think about it, it's like, no, they actually were thinking about this back in 3rd grade and like refining the idea. And then when they finally stepped on the gas, they were really successful. So don't beat yourself up if you don't just sit down and it all flows. It's also different for things like fiction. If you're doing nonfiction, you need a lot of planning. Fiction, sometimes there's a lot of tangents and things.
Flow. Yeah.
And
yeah. Well, this was great, Elaine. I mean, there's so many kind of takeaways here from how to be a writer, how to be an entrepreneur, and really liked our conversation on all these different tools in AI, which I think if nothing else for anyone in business out there, it's like a reminder that whether we like it or not, we need to set aside a little bit of time to teach ourselves and to learn these new tools and figure out what works and doesn't work. Because as we're discussing this, I even feel guilty of it, that I kind of find like my rhythm that I get into with my business, but you can stagnate, and other advisors or other businesses, it take certain market share or pass you by using these other tools that you've been averse to. So that was something for me, I know is just kind of a big reminder that you have to keep on kind of being a student of the game, I guess you would say.
That is such good advice. I have a friend who sets aside a couple of hours every 2 weeks. That's her rhythm to learn a new tool. And I'm trying to follow her example because just the Fathom alone has allowed me to do many more books and keep clients much happier because everybody has a bias to speed in our economy. People don't want to wait a year for a book. They love to get it in 5 or 6 months. And now I can honestly say that I can do it. I would never promise that before because with any client, you have to be honest in the expectations you're setting. And I just started introducing these sort of lightning books now because I don't have to spend hours and hours on the notes. That alone, like if you add one thing every year that saves you hours and hours, your business, that's what I'm talking about with leverage, with the $1 million one person businesses. That gives you the ability to do more than a person can reasonably do. And that with AI, who knows, like you could almost have the equivalent of a team of 10 people working for you if you learn how to use these tools. But the key is learning them and understanding confidentiality and legal issues and all the other stuff, which takes some time and investment sometimes to get it right. And you might leave some on the cutting room floor, but that is great advice, great parting advice.
I know. And it is difficult because I try to do like what I'm describing right now, but just like you mentioned, the legal side and whatnot in our industry, our compliance overhead is extraordinary. So, I might find a great idea and be like, oh, do I want to go through the 10 different hurdles that then I have to get this to be compliant or whatever. And I know every business, every industry has something like that. So I guess it's just a commitment like anything else.
Well, also networking can help with that. That's one reason I formed the journalism group. It's just a private Zoom call with 8 to 10 journalists that I know and trust, and we share information like that question about the confidentiality so that we can use our minds together on similar work and figure out how do we do this thing, because we all want to use it, but we have to use it ethically. We have to use it properly. So if you have some friendlies like non-competing financial advisors, like that you trust.
That's where the best ideas come from. Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the friendly competitor, where you can't do all the work in the world yourself, but you can become a brain trust for each other and help keep your whole sector relevant. Because let's face it, all these industries are going to be disrupted, and we're all trying to figure out, okay, well, if all these mainstream publications die, and we're all qualified journalists and the world needs news, like where do we go to report it?
Yeah, exactly.
Financial advisors, right? We have the robos and stuff, and not everybody wants to work with a robo. I don't. I have a person and I get a lot of value from that. So it's like, okay, so how do you find those people that value the personal relationship? And forget about the people that are going to want everything automated. That's not your customer unless you're going to have an automated tool as well. That's where all the networking and stuff comes into play.
Yeah. It's like, as the contractors say, there's like a tool for every job. I guess you can always kind of find your sweet spot. But thank you so much for your time, Elaine. This was a great conversation. I feel like we could almost have a round 2 on all these different subjects, but really appreciate you. And this was fantastic.
Thank you so much, Brian. What an honor to be here. And thank you for all the great work you do for the community, because financial education is so important for our futures. And I don't think people always recognize the work that people in this industry are doing to keep us all moving forward. And it's very aligned with my mission of helping the average person have enough money to prosper and thrive. So thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure. I love doing it. And I think we're on the same wavelength there. But everyone, thank you again for tuning into another episode of the Kuderna podcast. I'm Brian Kuderna. Today we had the pleasure of speaking with Elaine Pofeldt. I'll put her info in the show notes, so you're more than welcome to follow her. And wherever you're listening or watching, always remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.
This podcast is intended for the general public and for informational purposes only. The show does not provide any recommendations or investment advice regarding any specific account type, service, strategy, or product, or to otherwise act in any fiduciary or other capacity. Please contact a financial professional for guidance and information that is specific to your situation. Brian Kuderna does not provide tax or legal advice. Please contact your accountant or legal advisor to discuss your situation. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Kuderna Financial Team, and opinions stated are their own. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. References to specific securities, asset classes, and financial markets are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute a solicitation, offer, or recommendation to purchase or sell a security. Brian Kuderna is a registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. OSJ 300 Broadacres Drive, Suite 175, Bloomfield, New Jersey, 07003. Phone number 973-244-4420. Securities products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Kuderna Financial Team is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. California Insurance License Number 0K04194.